Welcome to the Open Door Church podcast. We are a church in Enid, Oklahoma, whose mission is to share and show Jesus to Enid, Oklahoma, and the rest of the world. If we can answer any questions you have or help you in any way, please feel free to reach out to us on social media or visit our website at opendoorenid.church.
I am very grateful to get to be here this morning to teach God's Word. That's one of the few things in life. In the last few years, I've gotten really good at saying no to a lot of things to try to really simplify what I do in life. But one thing I'll always say yes to is opportunity to teach God's Word because it's just something I really love to do and always honored and grateful to get to do that. And so this morning we're going to be starting a new series. This is not going to stay up. We're just going to leave it low. Start a new series that we're just calling Road to Easter. And so we're just kind of walking through a couple of the stories that lead up to the Easter story. And then in 2 weeks from now, we'll get to celebrate Easter Sunday. And so we're really excited for that. But I want to start off by telling you a story that's something that came to mind that happened a few years ago. And there was this guy that I had met that went to the church I was a part of back then. And the first time I met him, he actually came to our Sunday school class. And, you know, some of you may have grown up going to Sunday school. And here's this guy, and he comes in, he was new. And from the moment I met him, I was like, this guy is nuts. Like, he was just cracking jokes the whole time during Sunday school class. And then we ended up going to service, and I sat next to him, and he was just like getting after it. I mean, he's like dancing and singing and clapping and shouting, and like we're in a, you know, more like a church that's a little more laid back, a little more traditional. So you could say that he definitely stood out amongst everyone else. But I remember there was one night he came to our college group that I was leading at the time, and that night I was actually playing in the band. And so before service, I was in the band. We were up there practicing, and he came early. And he just sat in the front row and he started singing along with the band, like while we were just practicing. And he was just, you know, he was all excited. He was getting after it. And like, you could tell he had just started to broke down and he was in tears. Before long, he was on his knees. And before long, he was laying down face flat on the ground, just bawling. And so for me, I'm like, you know, we're practicing. There's nobody else in the room. So I was like, band, you guys got this. I'm going to go sit with him. And he was just like weeping and just bawling so hard that he couldn't get any words out. So I just sat next to him on the ground, put my hand on his back, and was just praying for him. I had no idea what was going on, no idea. And then, you know, we get everything together. We start the service, and he's still, you know, on the front row. And so he's cleaned up, he's good, he's ready. So then we start the service. We start singing, and again, he's on his knees, he's bawling, he's on his face, like laying down on his face. And I kid you not, there was a puddle of snot and tears forming on the ground, and everyone in the room was just like, what is going on? Like, he's literally in the front row. It's not a very big room. There's like 30 people maybe in the room. So everybody knows like what's going on in the front. And you could just feel the awkwardness in the room. And everybody, I think, all had one thought in mind. And I'm a little ashamed to say this out loud, but I think everyone was thinking the same thing. We were like, this guy is kind of nuts. Like, this guy's one of those weird Christians. And you know the type. You know, when I say that, you're like, you maybe just think of someone. You know, there's people that love Jesus, but there's people that like love Jesus, and they like go bonkers for Jesus, and their worship is so extravagant. And as I thought about that story, honestly, this week I was kind of convicted because I realized that he wasn't the crazy one, because he was so overwhelmed by the love of God that he couldn't help but hold it in. He just let it all go. And he's not that, to me, that's not crazy Christianity. That's just real Christianity. And today we're going to look at a story that is a story of a woman whose love and her worship for Jesus was so overwhelming, so extravagant, that it made everyone else in the room uncomfortable. And when we see stories like that, I think we're all faced with this question in our heart, and that's this question of how much do you really love Jesus? Do you love Jesus like these people love Jesus? What is Jesus worth to you? Are you so overwhelmed with the love of God that you're just willing to let it all go because you can't help but hold it in? And so we're going to be in John chapter 12. If you want to turn there, you can follow along on the screen, or you can even use your phone, or crazy enough, they actually make the Bible in print now. And so if you have one of those, you can follow along in print. We're going to be in John chapter 12, and where we're at Jesus, like at this point in Jesus' life, this is like the height of Jesus' ministry. There's a lot of people following him. A lot of people are really excited about what Jesus is doing, but there's also a lot of people that don't really like him. There's also a lot of people that are ready to kill Jesus. And so he's kind of at this height of this ministry. Everybody knows who he is. They either love him or they hate him. And this is kind of where we're going to pick up. And so starting, I'm going to read this section, and then we'll break it down verse by verse. But it says this, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus arrived at Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume, and she poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of their perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected, "Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages." He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and as keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. "Leave her alone," Jesus replied. "It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." So verse 1, we're just going to break this down kind of verse by verse as we go through it. Verse 1, it says it was 6 days before the Passover. So this is 6 days before Jesus is going to be arrested, beaten, humiliated, and then hung on a cross. And so it tells us that there was this dinner given in Jesus' honor in Bethany. And he said, and Lazarus was there. If you flip over literally one page in your Bible, you know that Lazarus wasn't always alive. Like Lazarus at one point was dead. And then Jesus showed up and he brought him back to life. And so here Jesus is back in town, and now they're going to throw this huge party for Jesus. They're having this banquet in Jesus' honor because Jesus had just raised their friend from the dead. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been to a lot of parties in my life. I've been to birthday parties. We go to even weddings. You can kind of consider a party, graduation parties. I don't think any of us have ever been to a Jesus just raised me from the dead kind of party. Like, this isn't your normal party. People are pumped. Like, one of my favorite things to do whenever I have like a birthday dinner or we're at a birthday party, our group of friends, we have this tradition to where we go around the room and we all tell our favorite memory or favorite story of the person who we're celebrating. If you haven't ever done that, it's a really fun thing to do at birthdays. But I can imagine the disciples are going around the room. They're all telling their favorite Jesus stories, right? And, Peter's like, man, remember that time we first met Jesus and we were out there fishing and he told us to throw our nets on the other side. And we're like, who's this lunatic thinking that, we know we're fishermen. We know what we're doing. What is putting our nets on the other side going to do? But then all of a sudden we threw our nets on the other side and we had this so much fish. Our boat started sinking and it was crazy. We didn't know what to do. We're like, who is this guy? And I can imagine John is like, no, you want to talk about a fish story. How about the time where there was literally 5,000 or maybe a lot more people and Jesus had 2 fish? And he just he held it up and then it's he brought it down and then there was way more fish. Who is this guy? What is going on? What is happening? Where are all these fish coming from? Or I can imagine James, telling the story hey, remember that time when we were just walking through town and there was a funeral? There was literally a funeral procession going through town and Jesus just walks up and he's like, stop. What an awkward moment. You just stop our funeral. And then he just puts his hand on the dead guy and he's like, young man, get up. And then the guy just rose from the dead, and everybody goes crazy. And then Lazarus, Lazarus is like, no, you guys want to know about a dead story. He's like, I was dead. I was wrapped like a mummy probably, and I smelled terrible, and I didn't know, and I was gone, and then all of a sudden Jesus was like, Lazarus, and it's I just arose, and then I walked out, and apparently I smelled really bad. But you can imagine everybody's just sharing all these crazy stories, and everyone's laughing, everybody's having a good time. Not one person in that room is thinking that in a few days Jesus is going to be captured and put to death. Because they think Jesus is going to be king. They're like, this guy's, he's raising people from the dead. Who can stop Jesus? Who can stop what and they're just They're so excited. They're so pumped. But here's the thing you need to know about that room of people. Everybody in that room admired Jesus. Everybody liked him. Everybody respected him. But then in every party, and many of you know this, there's always that one person who like takes things a step too far, right? Some of you are that person. Who here knows those people in your life? Like, yeah, like you can point at them right now and you're like, yeah, that person, they always go a step too far. And some of you, if you're like, I don't know that person, you're probably that person. But I can honestly say that 9 times out of 10, I am that person. I'm going to tell you guys a story, and please don't judge me for this story. When I was in high school, me and one of my friends, where we had a brand new teacher, it was our first year teaching, and we just loved to mess with this teacher. So much so that on Halloween night, we were like, you know what? We should go like prank this teacher's house. Like that sounds like a fun thing to do. We figured out where she lived. We like did some hardcore searching on the internet, ended up finding her address. We show up to her house. And guys, this wasn't like your typical like toilet paper, kind of fun thing. This was like, you should never do this to somebody's house. We literally went and raided trash dumpsters and filled the back of our truck with trash bags and just ripped trash bags open in their yard. We found literal roadkill. We had a dead skunk that we left on her porch. We had all these different things that we were going to do. And the one thing to kind of top it all off was this was just random, but we ended up getting a jar of peanut butter, and we just like rubbed it all over the doorknob so that, when they came in, he was like, oh, you got peanut butter on your hands. We're in the middle of doing all this, and all of a sudden we hear a siren, like nearby, not like coming for us, but we're like, hey, there's a siren. It might come into this neighborhood. We should go get in the truck and just wait this out. Or maybe just leave. And I was like, wait. Let me, we had done everything, but I was like, let me get the peanut butter real quick. And so I run and I put the peanut butter on the door, and we run and we get in the truck. And I kid you not, 10 seconds later, right in front of the truck, we just see these hands just slam down on the hood. And there's this guy looking at us. And I was like, oh no, what's going on? And he's like, get out of the truck. And I was like, hold on, can we talk about this, I don't really want to get out, because I'm afraid he's, going to call the cops on us. I didn't know what was going on. And I was like, please don't call the cops. And he's like, I'm not. He's like, you guys just need to come clean this up right now. So I was like, okay. So we go there, and me and my friend, we're got our hats down low, our hoods up, because our teacher comes out of the house, and she just starts screaming. She's like, you guys, you don't know who you're messing with, and I'm going to call all your parents. And we're just like, please don't see who we are. We're just got our back to her, picking up trash. And then she was like, you know what? I'm calling your parents right now. And we're like, you first. I don't know. And we ended up having a third friend, and he wasn't in her class, so she didn't know him. And we're like, you're first. Go give her your mom's number. And so she calls. Nobody picks up. And she's like, oh, you lucked out. She's like, who's next? And then she walks around to the front of us, and she's like, Justin and Clay. And she just starts dying laughing because she realized that she caught us in the midst of pranking her. And I was like, how did you guys know we were out there? And they're like, well, we were watching this scary movie, and then all of a sudden we heard the door handle jiggle, and we went outside, and we saw our yard was trash. And I was like, we took it one step. If we had just left the peanut butter, we could have gotten away with it. And then a few days later, she's laughing, and we clean it up. And I was like, oh, sweet, my mom's never going to know. On Monday morning, I wake up to my mom on the phone with my teacher, and she's like, he did what? And what happened? And I was like, dang it, you had to call my mom. Come on. But there's always that friend that takes things one step too far, right? And this was Mary in the room. Here's all these people. They're honoring Jesus. They're sharing these stories. They're loving Jesus. But then there's Mary that just takes things a step too far. And it says this in verse 3. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume, and she poured it out on Jesus' feet and wiped her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So she takes this bottle of what it says it's pure nard, which I was like, well, I wonder what that is. And so I looked up. It comes from a very specific flower in Nepal, in the Himalayas. And so it's super, super rare. In her time, she's living in she's living in Israel. And so this thing came all the way from Nepal, super, super rare perfume. And by the way, in case you're wondering, you can buy this today. It is expensive. It's $59 on Amazon for a little bottle of essential oil size. So if you're the essential oil type, a little bit of lavender, a little bit of eucalyptus, a little bit of nard for your house. I laughed really hard when I saw that you could buy it on Amazon. But what she did was very, very controversial for a couple of reasons. Number one is that nard was very, very expensive. This isn't something that you could just go pick up at the grocery store. This was likely a family heirloom. This is something that might have been passed down from multiple generations. There's really no price that you could put on it. It was likely only used whenever your most precious loved one died, and you would use it to anoint their body. Here in a second, in verse 4, we're going to see that the bottle was worth a year's wages. Can you imagine if you were to take your, however much money, some of you guys just did your taxes, however much money you made last year, imagine you took all that, you spent it in one moment. You just poured it out. In Mark's gospel, John just says she pours it. In Mark's gospel, when he tells the story, it says that she broke the jar. She broke the jar open and dumped all of it out. All of that money, a year's wages, gone like that. It was controversial for another reason, because in that culture, it was highly inappropriate for a woman to touch a man in public. And here she is, pouring this stuff on him, rubbing his feet, using her hair to rub it in his feet. And in Mark's gospel, it actually says that she poured it on his head as well. And so she's just putting this oil everywhere. This is one of those moments where everything in the room, everybody's laughing, everybody's having a good time. Everything in the room just comes to a complete stop. What in the world is she doing? What is happening right now? And then we'll see how everybody else responds in verse 4. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected, "Why wasn't this perfume sold and money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages." And he did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and as a keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. And so it's easier for, John tells us that Judas speaks up, and he's like, hey, whoa. What are you doing? That money, we could have sold that. We could have done so many other things with that. And it's really easy for us to be like, oh yeah, of course Judas would say that. He was just trying to, he's going to betray Jesus anyway. He was just trying to get some money for himself. Of course he would be the one to condemn her. But I think if we're being honest, that Judas is just the one that said out loud what everybody else was already thinking. In Mark's gospel, when he tells the same story, he actually tells us that he says that all the disciples were thinking the same thing. In Mark 14:4-5, it says, "Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, 'Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor.' And they rebuked her harshly." They're rebuking her as she's doing it. You can imagine they're just like, "Mary, what are you doing? Why would you give up all of that? Why would you just pour all that out? I can't believe what you're doing right now." And I love this line. It says, "Why this waste?" Just think about that line for a second. Why this waste? Think about how many other things we could have done with that money. And I wonder where this meets us. I wonder how many of us do the same thing. We have some nard. We have our time, our resources, our potential. We have all these things in our lives. How many of us would say, "Oh, but those are too valuable to give up for Jesus"? Hey, I'll go to church here and there, but you want me to give up my whole life? What a waste. Or I'll follow, when I get older and I have kids and I grow up, hey, I'll follow God then, but while I'm young, I just want to do what I want to do. Why would I waste my life? Or maybe you say, hey, I'll give occasionally, and if I see someone in need, I'm a generous person, I'm going to help them out, but you want me to give a significant portion of my income to God every single week? What a waste. This is what they're all thinking. Why would you waste everything that you had on Jesus? And the thing that I love about this story is that her act of worship made every single person in the room feel uncomfortable except for one, and that was Jesus. Look at Jesus' response. It says, "Leave her alone. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will not always have the poor among you. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. I wonder how many of us that we're so focused on living our life to impress everyone else in our life, and yet we fail to honor the person who matters the most. How many of us are living our lives to try to gain respect, to try to honor, to try to impress all these other people, but yet we fail to honor Jesus, the one who matters more than anyone else? I fear, where I'm going with this, I fear that so many of us will fail to live out like a real, authentic Christianity that honors Jesus, and instead will trade it in for a watered-down, cautious Christianity just because we don't want to be the one that looks crazy to everyone else. Like we'll come to a banquet to honor Jesus, but like we don't want to be one of those radical or crazy Christians who give up everything. Or maybe we'll even get out the bottle of nard. Maybe we'll even get out the thing that we cherish the most. But what we do is we just dab a little bit of it. Hey, Jesus, I'll give you a little bit of this. I'll give you a little bit of this, but then I'm going to seal it up and I'm going to keep the rest of it for myself. I mean, after all, like we do love Jesus. We just don't want to give up all of our time or all of our attention or all of our resources. We just want to give him a little bit and keep the rest for ourselves. Whenever I was, some of you I may have shared this story before. I don't remember if I did. It was a while ago. But some of you guys know my story. Whenever I was in college, I was just going to school, seeking out my degree, kind of doing what I wanted to do. And during my sophomore year of college, I really came to this point where I was like, I really want to follow Jesus. Like, I don't just want to go and live my life. Like, I really want to give up my life for Jesus and do what he would have me do. And so in the midst of that, I felt like Jesus was telling me, hey, I want you to go. At the time, I grew up in Claremore, but I was going to school at Oklahoma State, living in Stillwater, loved every part of it. And I felt like God was saying, hey, I want you to move back home, finish school there. And, if you've ever gone away from your hometown to college, like, you don't want to be the guy that moves back, right? That's like, oh, he couldn't cut it, whatever. I didn't want to do that. But I just felt like God was like, hey, I want you to move back home. And I was like, well, why? Why do you want me to move back home? And God was like, I just want you to trust me. I want you to move back home. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to move back home. I don't have any idea why. I don't have any idea what I'm going to do, but I'm going to go back home. And I remember as I began to tell people that, most of the Christians in my life thought that I was a little bit crazy. They were like, wait, what are you doing? What? And they ask all these questions like, well, why would you do that? Why would you give up why would you give up this degree you're going after? Why? That doesn't even make any sense. Why would you do that? Everyone thought I was crazy. And the thing that blew my mind the most was it wasn't until I shared this story with two non-Christians that I actually felt like I'd made the right decision. I remember on my first day in class, months had gone by because I made this decision in the spring. Here we are in the fall. I'm in my first day in class back home, and I see two guys I went to high school with, and they're like, oh, hey, you're back. What? Well, how come you moved back? And I tell them the story like, hey, I just really been following God, and like I felt like God wanted me to move here, and so I came back to go to school here. I really don't know the details. And they were like, oh, well, that's really cool. That's really awesome that you're like following God. And I was like, and these guys weren't even Christians. And I was like, here, these people that don't even get it, and yet the people that should get it think I'm crazy. And I learned in that moment that that's what it really looks like to follow Jesus, that following Jesus isn't always the sensible thing, but it's 100% worth it. One of the biggest lies that I think that we have in the American church is that God just wants to like sprinkle a little bit of goodness, a little bit of religion, just a little bit of, going to church, a little bit of being a good person. He just wants to sprinkle a little bit of that into our lives while we are free to just go and live out our own desires. And I just want to say that that's not what Jesus wants. Like Jesus, in the best way, Jesus wants to mess your life up. Like he wants to come in and rearrange all of your priorities, everything about you. He wants to rearrange all of it to be about him so that he can show you the life that is truly abundant life. It's not just like, oh, if I just go to church, be a good person, and don't do anything bad, like then God will bless me. No, like he wants you to give everything to him. In Luke 14:33, I want to share a couple scriptures with you. Luke 14:33, Jesus says this, "Those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciple." In Matthew 16:25, it says, "If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it." So I'm here to say today that you can't truly follow Jesus if you're not willing to give him everything. When we look back through church history, most scholars would believe that all but one of the apostles were martyred for Christ. Like all of Jesus' followers, or all of the original disciples, all but one of them gave up their lives for the sake of Christ. Following Jesus will cost us. Like most of us, if we're being honest, most of the people sitting in this room right now have grown up in a world where it was the norm to be a Christian, right? Like most people in Oklahoma and where we live, most people respect Jesus. But I think we all know that this is not the world that we're living in today. Christians are on a slow march to becoming the marginalized of our world and the marginalized of our society. And I just want to say that the only Christians who are going to last are the ones that are fully devoted to him. Because the ones who are just halfway in, they're going to walk away, and most of them already have. But we have to stop trying so hard to be liked by playing it safe, and we have to start showing to the world that Jesus is truly worth giving up everything for. I saw this quote a few months ago, and I want to share it with you. It's from A.W. Tozer, and he says, "It is of far greater importance than that we have better Christians than that we have more of them." And he's talking about, if we're going to be a church that's going to reach a lot of people, it's of far greater importance that we have committed, solid, fully devoted Christians and that we just have a bunch of them. Because Jesus isn't interested in having a bunch of half-hearted followers. He wants those who are fully committed to him. I want to pause for a second because some of you may be in this room and you're thinking like, man, this sounds intense. Like that sounds like a lot. I don't want anybody to walk away with this thought. I don't want people to walk away thinking Jesus demands everything. I want you to walk away with this thought instead. Rather than thinking Jesus demands everything, I want you to walk away with the thought that Jesus is worth everything. I want you to think for a moment just how good Jesus is. I want you to think for a moment why he's worth giving everything to. I want you to think just how much he's given us. I want to read a passage from a book I've been reading, and it just talks about how front to back the Bible is literally just a story about God pouring out goodness for us. And as I read this, I was like moved to worship. And I was like literally laying in my bed, oh man, this is so good. God, you're so good. So I want to read this to you. It's from the author's name is Andrew Wilson. It says in Genesis 1:29, God says, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit." So he's given us raspberries, olives, lemons, rosemary, garlic, mangoes, coffee. Am I right? A few chapters later, it says the animals are thrown in as well. And Genesis 9:3, it says, "As I gave you the green plants, I also give you everything." So we get honey, eggs, cheese, cream, lamb, trout, bacon, steak, ice cream. Am I right? Everything. It says God gives humans dominions over all creation, mountain ranges and waterfalls, deserts and jungles, leopards, glaciers, sequoias, peacocks. He gives rain, light, fragrances, and flavors. And even after we have sinned, the gifts keep coming. He gives the promise that one day the seed will come to crush the snake. He gives cloves to Adam and Eve. He gives sons, Cain, Abel, and Seth. He gives an ark and a rainbow. He gives Abraham a name, a seed, a blessing, and a land flowing with milk and honey. He gives children to barren women and inheritances to undeserving men. He gives covenants and promises through angelic visitors, wrestling matches, rams and lambs, and burning bushes. He gives freedom from slavery, manna from heaven, water from rock, and forgiveness for sin. He gives prophets and priests, tabernacle and Torah, Exodus and empire. And you skip ahead to the New Testament, almost every parable in the New Testament describes God as a persistent giver. He's like a farmer who scattered seeds so liberally that most of it didn't even take root. He's like a king who gave forgiveness of a debt of 10,000 talents. He's like a vineyard owner who gave his workers far more than their work was worth. He's like a father who gave away half his estate to his rebellious son and still threw him a party when he came back after wasting it all. He's like a king who gave wedding invitations to every poor and undesirable in the country. And he sums it up with this. He says, none of these things are needed by God or deserved by his creatures, and yet he gives them anyway. And as I read that, I was just like, man, God is so good. Like, he gives us so much. And you fast forward to the life of Jesus, and you see that God himself becomes the gift. He gives himself in human form to die the death on our behalf. Jesus didn't just dab a little bit of his life. He broke his life open, and he poured out his blood for each and every one of us. And that's why he's worth everything. It's absurd that we would be stingy in what we give to Jesus when we recognize just how much he's given us. The only right response is to break open our lives at his feet and pour it all out for him. Many of you know this firsthand. Many of you have experienced it. Because I know what every person in here who has fully surrendered their life to Christ, I know what you guys know, and it's that, number one, it cost you something, but it was the best decision that you ever made. Because you discovered purpose and meaning and love and forgiveness and joy and peace, and the list goes on. And so I love how Jesus summarizes, and he doesn't say it in John's gospel, but in Mark's gospel, he summarizes this story like this in Mark 14, Verse 9, he says, truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done, what Mary has done, will also be told in memory of her. I always thought that was kind of interesting that Jesus would say that. Like, hey, wherever the gospel is preached, like, I want you to tell this story too. Why did Jesus say that? Because I think Jesus wanted those who would follow him to know what it looks like to truly love him. He wanted us to have a picture of this is what it really means to follow Jesus. He wanted us to see that our love for him should far outweigh every other thing in this life. So I want to ask you this morning, what would that look like for you? What would it look like if you were to take your life and shatter it at the feet of Jesus? For some, it maybe means that you would give the largest gift that you've ever given to another person in need in like an extravagant way. Maybe it means that you would give up some of your free time to go and serve our community in a radical way. Maybe it means that you would literally give up TV and social media and spend the exact same amount of time in God's word or worshiping him. Maybe it means that instead of focusing as much on physical training, you would give that same amount of time to training for godliness. Maybe you would make a total career change to do something that really is going to matter in eternity, not just this life. I think about, the High Seas are not here today, but I think about for them that they picked up their whole family and they came here to start this church. Maybe there are others in this room who God would have do the same thing, that he would have you sell everything you have to go and be a missionary or to plant a church to reach people for Jesus. Whatever it looks like for you, my hope and my prayer is that you would take everything you've got and use it to make much of Jesus, that you would break open your life at his feet. And I would end there, but I want to share just one last thing. I once heard a pastor teach on this scripture, and he pointed something out that I never would have noticed on my own. Like, it was just the first time I heard it, I was like, that's a really interesting perspective. So I want to share it with you, and it comes from the very last part of what we read in John's gospel in 1 chapter 7, when Jesus said, leave her alone. It was intended that she should save this perfume on the day of my burial. And then he said, you will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. Excuse me. I always thought it was really interesting that Jesus said that, like, hey, you'll always have the poor, but you won't always have me. Like, what did he really mean by that? Well, here's what everybody else in that room didn't know that Jesus knew, is that in 6 days, the disciples didn't know this. In 6 days, Jesus was going to be arrested, he was going to be beaten, humiliated, and hung on a cross, and he would die and be put in a grave. But then 3 days later, it tells us that there were a group of women, and they gathered up their spices to go and anoint Jesus' body. Interesting, right? Like, these women were about to go do what Mary just did. They had their own nard, and they had their spices, they had all these things, and they were going to go anoint Jesus' body. But when they got there was no body to anoint because Jesus wasn't in the grave, he was alive. And he pointed out that Mary was the only person in history to ever get to anoint Jesus' body. She was the only one who gave all that she had. Nobody else could say that. None of these other women could say that. And he says, I imagine that some of these women, they would have gone home, and they had their jar and they, put it on the shelf for safekeeping, and, they lived their life. And every time they saw that jar, they'd pick it up and be like, man, what a waste. I never got to give this to the person that mattered most. I never got to use what I had to make much of Jesus. Instead, I kept it, and now I don't have the chance to. What a waste. Because here's the deal. Every person in this room has some gifts, some talents, some time, resources. You've got all this potential. But we've only got a limited amount of time to use it to make much of Jesus. And my hope and my prayer is that none of us would come to the end of our life and hold up our best accomplishments, hold up everything that we've accumulated, hold up all those things that we value in life and look at them and think, man, what a waste. Because I never gave this up for the thing that mattered the most. Not that these things are bad, not that they're evil, but I never gave my life to what mattered most. What a waste. Don't come to the end of your life and be filled with regret because you were so busy trying to save your life that you actually wasted it. The best thing that you can do is to break open your life at his feet and see what he can do with it. I'm going to ask the band to come back up this morning, and we're going to have a time of response. And I just want to walk you through a couple potential responses, maybe something that God is calling you to. Maybe there's some in the room who today, maybe you realize you've just been kind of playing it safe. You've just been, walking through, kind of living this comfortable, sensible, cautious Christianity, but you've never really taken that step to give Jesus everything. I want to invite you this morning as we sing, take a moment to just pray. Maybe you want to stand up and sing and just let it all out like we talked about at the beginning, or maybe you just want to sit and talk to God and be like, okay, God, what is it that you would have me do? What is it that you would call me to give up? And there's maybe another group of people in the room who maybe you've never given your life to Christ. You never publicly made a commitment to follow Jesus. And I just want to tell you this morning that he's worth everything. He's worth giving up your whole life to. And I want to encourage you during this time. I'm going to be in the back of the room. A couple other people will be in the back of the room. The lights will be down. Nobody's going to be looking at you. But if you've never publicly made a decision to follow Jesus, I just want to ask you to come to the back and talk to one of us, because yes, or you can sit and pray a prayer in your own heart and your own mind. But I want to encourage you that following Jesus is like a public thing. We celebrate this thing called baptism, not because following Jesus isn't one of those just personal, decisions we make in our own heart. It's a public thing that we want to proclaim to the world. In Romans 10, 9 and 10, it says, if you confess with your heart and believe with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, you'll be saved. Right? If you confess, or if you believe in your heart, I'm going to butcher this verse. I'm really sorry. I should have wrote it down. I had it in memory, but I'm losing it. Let's just read it. I got time. This is too important for me to just try to do it off the cuff here. It says, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, but it is with your mouth that you confess and are saved. Right? It says, if you believe it, if you do it in your heart, then yeah, you're justified, but it's with your mouth. It's a confession. It's public. And so, yeah, you can sit here and pray a prayer in your heart, but I want to invite you to come to the back of the room. We would love to pray with you. We would love to talk with you about what it really means to follow Jesus. We'd love to talk to you about baptism, about going public with your faith. And so if you've never done that, if you've never just publicly made that decision, I want to encourage you to come back there. We'd love to pray with you. And but I'm going to pray, and then you just respond however God is leading you to respond. But don't play it safe. Don't try to save your life. Give it up for him. So, Father, we thank you for your word, and we thank you that we have the opportunity to come and gather together to worship you and just to be reminded of how good you really are. And God, I pray that it would never be weird for people in this room to just let it all go and worship of you, because we're so overwhelmed with how good you are. I pray that wouldn't be weird Christianity. That would just be normal. That would just be what it really looks like to follow you. And God, thank you for this picture of Mary, because you gave us a picture of what it looks like to just be fully in love with you. It's not like this, safe thing where we just keep it all to ourselves, but we just let it all go because we're so overwhelmed with how good you are. And God, I pray for everyone in this room that we would abandon the things that we're hanging on to in life, whether it be some sort of accomplishment or some sort of possession or whatever it is that we can accumulate in this life, that we would just let it all go and realize that you are worth every bit of our lives, and we would just give it all to you. We'd break it open at your feet. And God, lastly, I pray if there's anybody in here who's never publicly given their life to you, never surrendered everything to you, I pray that today they would do that. They wouldn't wait another day. They wouldn't just push it off, but they would say, God, you're worth it. I'm giving you everything today. So God, we love you and we praise you. Use this time. We give you all the glory and praise, and we ask this in your name. Amen.